It is now my pleasure to ask the Vice President of the North Down Association and also the Vice President of the Northern Ireland Conservatives, Dr. Paul McGarrity, to introduce today our guest speaker. Thank you.
Daniel Hannon, writing this year for Conservative Home, when he was writing about criticising the methodology of electing our Conservative Party leader in June, and he said there was certainly agitation for a greater role for party activists, led by the tireless John Strafford and his campaign for conservative democracy. He is also chairman of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy, which seeks to, this is from the website, fairer leadership elections, an elected party chairman, and an empowered membership, i.e. us. And I don't think anybody could really criticise any of those objectives. But not happy or content with that, he has also written a book, Our Fight for Democracy. You're beginning to get the theme now. Our Fight for Democracy, which is a history of democracy in the UK, and John analyses the weakness of British democracy and how it may well be improved. So, a man who's sort of the beating heart of the Conservative Party. In the voluntary sector of the party, there are very, very few roles that John has not occupied or held with distinction over very many years. But we're all here tonight because this is our 30th anniversary, and it's very appropriate that John Strafford be our speaker at this event. Back in 1988, a number of us queued outside the Conservative Party Congress in Brighton. It used to be held in Brighton and places these days. With standing in the rain with our clipboards and getting people to sign a petition seeking for the Northern Ireland, then the North Down Model Conservative Association to gain affiliation with the National Union. John was one of our great supporters, and in 1989, a year later, at the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool, John spoke at the conference that was debate in Northern Ireland, and it was an inspiring speech, a speech of a great orator. It was just wonderful, but it was also highly effective. And after that speech, which got huge support, standing ovation from the whole hall, Northern Ireland Conservative associations were allowed to affiliate the National Union, i.e. we became proper, fully fledged Conservatives. And that, in no small measure, was due to the effort and work of John Strafford. On our 30th anniversary, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mr. John Strafford.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Friends, Conservative friends of Northern Ireland, Conservative friends of the United Kingdom. It's a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity to address you tonight. And I'd like to thank the Chairman, Paul, for inviting me, and I'd like to thank Paul for your very kind words in introducing me. I'd also like to say how delighted I am to be here to support Matthew Robertson, your Conservative candidate in North Down. And I look forward, Matthew, to seeing you as the first Conservative MP for North Down in the House of Commons. I met Matthew before, and I know he's a great Democrat and a great Conservative and a great believer in democracy. And I look forward to you being on those green benches in the House of Commons, standing up for the people of Northern Ireland. Of course, I've been to Northern Ireland several times in the last 30 years. And when I get to the airport and start walking down those steps, because of the friendship, the kindness and hospitality that has always been shown to me, I look at the ground and I see on that ground before me, welcome, welcome home. And that's how I feel about Northern Ireland, although I'm Yorkshireman. 30 years ago, the Conservative Party conference, a motion was passed to let the people of Northern Ireland become members of the Conservative Party. Sadly, many of those who worked so hard to bring that about are no longer with us. But I can still see their happy faces when that motion was passed. And some of them, I'm delighted to say, are still here today. So let me, for a few moments, indulge in a touch of nostalgia and explain to those that weren't there exactly how that all came about. In April 1988, I was the chairman of the Beaconsfield Constituency Conservative Association. It was one of the strongest constituency associations in the country. We had 6,500 members, and we were one of the biggest donors to the Conservative Party of any constituency. And out of the blue, I suddenly received a letter from a lady in Northern Ireland. And she was writing on behalf of the Tories for Equal Citizenship. And in the letter, she put the following question. Why is it that although I am a citizen of the United Kingdom, I cannot join and be a member of the political party which forms the government of the United Kingdom? Pretty good question, isn't it? Pretty good question. And I thought, wow, why is that? So I took it to my executive council in Beaconsfield, which had over 100 members, and I put it to them. And they couldn't give me an answer. So they said, write to the party chairman and ask him. And I wrote to Peter Brook. And I have to say his response wasn't very satisfactory. Because he said, oh, it's all historical and it's to do with the Ulster Unionists, etc., whatever. And my association said, well, that's not good enough. You know, really not good enough. So I began to get more and more involved with the North Down Model Conservative Association. And it came to a head at the 1988 party conference where the petition was organised. Remember, Paul?
Yeah.
And it got over 1,200 signatures.
Yeah.
And there was a packed out fringe meeting.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And 1988 was the last time that the Conservative Party ran a national membership drive. And they produced, I have to say, some pretty good literature. It was the Bulldog campaign, they called it. And also in those days, the party conference ran from Wednesday to Saturday, but the Saturday was just the leader's speech or the Prime Minister's speech. But the last session on the Friday was always a session on party organisation. And I put my name in to speak in that session because I wanted to explain to people why Beaconsfield had got so many members and why it was raising money and doing so well. And so I put my name down to speak, and James O'Fee has actually got a copy of that speech in his briefcase. He showed it to me tonight. Because having explained about membership, I went on to say there is another way in which we can increase the membership of the Conservative Party, and that is to allow the people of Northern Ireland to be members of it. And that got a huge cheer, huge cheer. And I remember afterwards, Theresa Gorman, the lovely Theresa Gorman, do you remember her? Yes, she was a great supporter. She came up to me, she said, "You changed the course of history." I thought, well, that's going a bit far, Theresa. But what I didn't know at the time was that Paul and Lawrence Kennedy people had been outside that conference, and they weren't, because they weren't allowed in, but they were watching it on a television. In those days we had these rental TV shops. And it was being watched on this television. So they saw my speech and immediately searched me out and found me and said, "Will you come over to Northern Ireland and speak to the Northern Ireland Conservatives?" And I said, "Yes, of course. When?" And they said, "Next Friday." I thought, gosh, yeah. Well, I said, "Okay, I'll come over. I'll come over on Friday." I have to admit to you, when I came over, I was expecting perhaps 10 or 20 people. I was taken to this hall. I stayed with Lawrence Kennedy. I was taken to this hall, and it was packed out with people. And they gave me a tremendous standing ovation. Every single one of them wanted to shake my hands. Took me an hour to get out of the place. And they were so enthusiastic. I have never ever seen so much enthusiasm for the Conservative Party in my entire life. So I was determined to try and do everything that I could to help. A report of this meeting went to Ian Gow, a superb, great MP, who immediately wrote to Peter Brook and said, "Look, Peter, you've got to do something about this. You know, people in Northern Ireland want to be members of the Conservative Party, and John Strafford made this speech, and you know, you've got to do something." And I was given a copy of his letter. So the following month, there was a meeting of the National Union Executive Committee, which was the top body of the Voluntary Party and the Conservative Party. And I sat on that, and I put forward a motion to affiliate the North Down Conservatives to the Conservative Party. And then I went to the Wessex Regional Council, which was a big meeting of all the constituencies in Essex, and got a motion passed there. And then, to my great disappointment, in November 1988, the National Union announced that they were rejecting the application. Now, what do you do when something like that happens? Well, I thought to myself, I'll have a look at the constitution of the Conservative Party, and I'll try and change it. Then I discovered it didn't have a constitution. It didn't exist. You had the Parliamentary Party, separate body. You had the Leader's Office that owns Smith Square, and you had the Voluntary Party. And there's no link between them. And, diverted for a moment, in the 80s there's a tax case that went to the High Court against the Conservative Party, and it was a question as to whether it was a incorporated association or an unincorporated association, because on that decision determined as to whether they paid income tax or corporation tax on their dividend income. And the court discovered that actually there were these three parts of the Conservative Party, and the only time they ever came together was when the leader changed. That moment in time when there was a meeting in London when one leader handed over to the next. And the problem was that nobody knew who had the right to call that meeting, and nobody knew who had the right to attend it. And so that was a big problem. However, the National Union of Conservative Associations did have a constitution, and so I went through it, and every time it said England and Wales, but Scotland was separate, I said insert and Northern Ireland. And I submitted this to the hierarchy and said I wanted this motion to be put forward to the Central Council that was meeting in Scarborough in March 1989. Well, that put the cat amongst the pigeons, you can imagine it. First of all, they said, you can't do it. And I said, yes, I can, because if you look under this cloth, it says I can. And then they got really panicky. And what happened was that I was invited to have dinner with Sir Peter Lane, who later became Lord Lane, who was the chairman of the National Union, and also with Peter Brook, who was the party chairman, and we had dinner at Peter Lane's home in Woking. It was a very enjoyable dinner, I have to say. He got somebody to come in to do a cooking for him, because he'd lost his wife. And Peter Brook, the party chairman, was concerned that my motion would dominate the agenda of the Central Council meeting, and that the media coverage would be all about this question of Northern Ireland and the affiliations. And he was concerned because we've got the European Parliament elections coming up. So what we did a deal, and I agreed that I would drop these motions, this motion to change the Constitution, if they undertook to have a motion at the Conservative Party conference in October 1989. And not only that, that at the Central Council meeting they would publicly announce that they were going to do this. And they agreed to that, and they stuck by their word, and I was delighted, because I knew and I was convinced that if we got this kind of motion to the party conference, then it would get passed. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's briefly what happened. It went to the conference and it got passed. That is a summary as to how the motion got there. It's a brief summary. I've not been able to include in that summary details of all the help that was given by people like Myrtle Bowl, Lawrence Kennedy, James O'Fee, Barbara Finney, Paul McGarrity, Gwen. There are so many people who worked tirelessly and often in the snow at Scarborough. We had the sleet and rain to get all this. We had tremendous support from the Daily Telegraph. The Spectator was very supportive, with Charles Moore, who was the editor, and Simon Heffer, who was deputy editor. I had meetings in their offices. I had a bomb threat at my home in Giles Cross, and I had to evacuate the house, and so did my two neighbours at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you can imagine how popular that made me. And for 2 years I came under the aegis of the Royal Protection Squad, which was based in Windsor, because they were the closest armed squad near to where I lived. From this whole episode, it led actually directly to the Conservative Party actually getting a constitution in 1998. And I can go into those in due course if people are interested. So that's the story of how the Northern Ireland Conservative came into being. Let me just briefly comment as to what happened after this, and then I'll sit down. Lawrence Kennedy for the general election in North Down in 1992, and he came within 4,000 votes of winning it. The Conservatives in Northern Ireland did not get any help or assistance whatsoever from Conservative Central Office. And it was only later that we found out the reason for that, and the reason why there had been so much antagonism to the Conservatives getting affiliated from Northern Ireland. And it was because the government was conducting secret negotiations with the IRA through the Dublin government. And the Dublin government was saying, you mustn't let these Conservatives get going, because that's going to upset all that we're doing to try and get a peace agreement, etc., etc. And I saw John Major driving into a meeting, and just the two of us. I raised this in 1990, raised the question of Northern Ireland, and he was very cool about it all. I thought, that's strange. I mean, why you know, so cold about the idea and everything. But then, subsequently, you could see from his autobiography that that was what it was all about. And then, tragically, of course, John Major conducting all these secret negotiations, trying to suppress Conservatives in Northern Ireland all the time, then handed over to Tony Blair and the Labour Party, whose policy had been to have a united Ireland anyway. And he then took over negotiating with these terrorists. You know, we ended up with the Good Friday Agreement. And I'll just say this, that I said at the time, I thought it was fundamentally flawed. And it's fundamentally flawed because it had this democratic fault line running right the way through it. Democracy is a system of government in which people exercise power through their representatives by a process in which the will of the majority is determined. And in a democratic society, the majority will take into account the views of the minority when exercising their will, and so govern for all the people. But what it cannot do is give a minority a veto on the will of the majority. Yeah. That isn't democracy. That is where the Good Friday Agreement inevitably was bound to fail. And it's failed. Today, politics is in turmoil. We are taking back power from an undemocratic European Union. A body where legislation is put forward by an unelected, unaccountable European Commission. A parliament where you can only vote for a party and not an individual. A council of ministers which meets in secret. A system of voting where a vote in Luxembourg is worth 4 times a vote in the United Kingdom because the size of the constituencies are so different. The road to democracy has been hard fought and it has been tough. Today, the baton of freedom and democracy has been passed to a new generation. I know they will carry that baton with all the fervour and enthusiasm that our predecessors have done. But let us now ride at this great moment in time where we're going to take back control of our country. Let us ride this rainbow of opportunity and grab that pot of gold that contains those precious stones of freedom, democracy, liberty and justice. So my message to the people of Northern Ireland is, you may say, I am a dreamer, but I am not the only one. I hope someday you will join me and the world will live as one. That is why we have to win this general election on December the 12th, because when we do so, we will take our nation back and begin to build once again a great vision of the future. The world will be our oyster. Vote Conservative and we will give you back your country.